Summer Isles of Eden, lying in dark purple spheres of sea. Alfred Tennyson. Welcome to this week's episode of Warfare, Advancement, Revisionism. My name is Preston Floyd, and as always, I am your host. I'd like to thank you all for joining me this week. I appreciate your support. If you're a newcomer, welcome. I hope you enjoy the show and you will listen and go back and peruse our backlog of episodes. And to all my returning listeners, thank you guys as always. Your support means a lot. This week, we will be moving into the British Isles, and this will probably take a week or two. Maybe this might just be a one-parter. We'll just have to wait and see. It's currently halftime of the Super Bowl, and boy, that game is a stinker. But I am happy for a couple of players on Seattle's team because they played for my alma mater. And, I'm happy to see some Gamecocks doing good in the pros. So this week we're moving into the British Isles, and we'll be talking about the final Mesolithic period, or at least the period where a Neolithic lifestyle first arrives on the islands and then slowly becomes more and more dominant. The important thing to remember for the British Isles is climate change is going to be a big factor in this area, and it has been since last season. The Younger Dryas period has ended, which remember is that period where at least Northern Europe and parts of Asia became much colder, basically like a kind of a quick shock ice age. And then the Holocene, which is the period we're currently in, takes place, and that's when things started to warm up. And, of course, sea levels began to rise. Now, it's important to remember that during the Younger Dryas, Britain was much colder, and there were it had a different population of animals living in the area. There were still wild horses, reindeer, things like that. So people that were used to hunting those animals would, of course, follow herds there. And it's also important to remember that Britain was connected to the mainland via what's known as Doggerland. Now, Doggerland has, at this point, by the start of this season, to 6000 BC, has submerged. That Britain's no longer connected via land bridge to the rest of Europe. However, the exact sea level isn't probably what it is today. There are parts of the British Isles that are now underwater that would have been above water at least until about 5000 BC. I think 5000 BC is the general consensus of when more or less Britain's current sea level, where Britain reaches its current sea level, about 5000 BC, give or take a couple of hundred years one way or the other. And this means that there are probably some sites that are now underwater. We've found some of these. I know on like the Netherlands side, they have found some submerged Mesolithic and Neanderthal sites, kind of in parts of the Netherlands and the Low Countries. But this rising sea level and new warmer climate is not just playing havoc with the humans living on the island. This causes a kind of explosion of new trees to grow. Pine trees are a lot more common. Birch trees, alder, those kinds of woods and forests really begin to expand and grow very rapidly. Also, reindeer disappear. Wild horses are eventually hunted to extinction on the island. And again, these are very similar to the Schwalski horses that we talked about when we were doing our horse domestication episode. So, with the disappearance of these animals, new types of hunting techniques are required to hunt the new animals that are beginning to populate the island as those other animals begin to disappear. This includes things like elk, red deer, roe deer, wild boar, aurochs, things like that. And of course, with the expanding forest, I'm sure, the expanding forest of new types of trees, I'm sure also was playing havoc with the types of plants that were being able to be harvested at any given time. Though, what those are specifically, I'm not very much of an expert on, but that is also changing their diet. Basically, the only thing that's kind of a continuation from this colder period that people are eating is sea life. Shell middens are very prevalent in a lot of the Mesolithic sites that you find, at least in Britain and Scotland, and I believe Ireland as well. That's basically the only continuation is the harvesting of shellfish and things like that. Everything else they're kind of learning again as this climate change is going on. As for the humans living there, they're mostly related to Western hunter-gatherers. We talked about Cheddar Man last season. He was, part of the Western hunter-gatherer. Though there are probably some humans who are at least partially descended from the earlier Magdalenian groups of humans, Homo sapiens, Cro-Magnons, who had gotten to the island much earlier, as well as, some Neanderthals probably living in the area as well. So there are some probably mixed groups, although, again, much more Western hunter-gatherer DNA shows up, probably because they just had a larger population. Britain was very cold, wouldn't necessarily be the most conducive to having a large, stable population. So the Western hunter-gatherers probably fairly quickly outnumbered and absorbed or killed off the remaining earlier waves of Homo sapiens living on the island. Now, they mostly had semi-permanent settlements, at least at this early, or I guess the ending part of the Mesolithic. Homes were fairly simple. Typically, they were circular, conical houses with, wattle and daub covering, straw, things like that. Basically, they were fairly tall with kind of these triangular entrances. And I'll try to put a picture up on the YouTube episode. But that's typically what people were living in on these kind of coastal communities in Britain. And again, these are not, very large, maybe, 25, 30 people, maybe a little bit more than that, depending on the time of year. But, very simple, easily assembled, easily abandoned homes. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you have a changing animal population, so the types of stone tools that they're making to hunt these animals changes. They begin to produce more microliths as opposed to the larger flake stones. They do smaller stones, for hunting, similar to what we've seen in other parts of the world. And this is apparently like a local innovation, which doesn't really surprise me. A lot of places kind of came up with the use of microliths as they began to hunt smaller game, as opposed to the large things like mammoths. This is something you see that's fairly typical. Now, the warmer climate meant that the descendants of the Western hunter-gatherers who came to the island were able to expand more easily into the island as well as to the neighboring islands, Ireland and the Isle of Man. Now, we've talked about this in the past. Both of those, Ireland definitely saw earlier instances of humans arriving. However, it appears that this was mostly temporary. Ireland was much colder when humans first arrived there, so there probably wasn't as much reason to go there. However, with kind of the warming period prior to the Younger Dryas, there is more and more evidence of humans going there, at least seasonally, or maybe for a couple of years, and then returning once the food had kind of disappeared or become much more difficult to find. However, after the Younger Dryas and the warming period, you begin to see far more sustained human settlement and occupation of the island, which is a little ironic because Ireland and the Isle of Man both kind of get their modern, well, close to their modern sea levels, about 6,500. So a little bit earlier than Great Britain does, but they really don't have evidence of permanent settlements on those islands until after they're kind of separated from Britain much more definitively and dramatically. But again, the climate was much more hospitable at that point, so it was probably worth it to stay there on a permanent basis. Of course, that climate would eventually draw new humans to the island. These would be descendants of the first farmers in Europe. From what we've been able to see from found sites and testable DNA, it looks like that the first people to arrive in the British Isles practicing agriculture are closely related to people who have been found in what is now known as the Iberian Peninsula. So this means they would have been descended from those of the Cardium ware culture. Although I do want to stress that is who they are closest related to. It's not necessarily the case that they came directly from Iberia. They could have been, relatives of the people who settled in Iberia, and then instead of kind of moving inland or around the Strait of Gibraltar and into what is now Portugal, they could have gone up those rivers and, colonized what is now the western coast of France, and then from there made the jump through Brittany and then directly into what is now England. Now, that is just one theory, and when that happens is also debated. The date that most people kind of consider the start of the Neolithic in Britain is 4,100. That's kind of like the definitive start date. Although there is some evidence that some farmers may have tried to settle there slightly earlier, or they did settle there slightly earlier, and there's just no... Remember, the sea level rose, some of their earlier sites could have been submerged. So when exactly this is happening is debated. It could have been a couple hundred years earlier. There's also, claims that they have found domesticated stores of grain to about 5,000, which is a very early date, but there are, of course, people living in what is now Normandy, the Brittany Peninsula in France. There are people who are a mix between hunter-gatherers, Cardium people, as well as the linear pottery people. They would all have been mixing in that area. So it's not necessarily the case that it's just people from the Cardium ware culture that are occupying the island. It could be a mix of several of them, and we just haven't found the DNA to test. So just keep all of this in mind. Apologies for the abrupt cut there. You guys probably heard the sirens. I'll try to get as much of that out as I can, but that was the reason for the quick cut. As for Ireland, they are around the same date that Neolithic farmers show up. Around the same time they show up in Britain. Again, the debates are a little debated. Also, it does appear as if other parts of the Neolithic package, aside from agriculture, show up in Ireland a little bit earlier than agriculture does. It looks like cattle were introduced to the island earlier, as well as sheep, goats, and things like that. But then agriculture follows soon after. And some of those dates, again, they're debated, but some put those dates as early as 4,500, which, it's about 500 years after the supposed earliest date that maybe agriculturalists tried to live in land in Britain, which would be about 5,000 BC. So, there may have been a couple of attempts before agriculture finally, took root, for lack of a better pun, in Britain and Ireland before, it gets established permanently. I think they have carbon dated some things in Ireland. I think there was evidence of cattle bones and sheep's teeth that they found, and those they dated to about 4,300, give or take 50 years one way or the other. So there is more and more evidence that agriculture, or at least parts of the Neolithic lifestyle, maybe not agriculture, but animal herding, maybe showed up a little bit earlier than previously believed. It's also important to note that agriculture, while expanded quickly in the islands, did not do so kind of evenly. They at first appear to have expanded along England's southern coast, minus, for some reason, the Cornwall Peninsula. I think that's what that is, or at least I know that Devon, Cornwall. It's that little bit of England that juts out to the south of Wales. I think it's the Bay of Bristol. Cornwall, for whatever reason, gets agriculture a little bit later. They basically go from the southern coast and then kind of expanded in kind of like a pincer up through the coast of Wales, also up along England's east coast to right around the Humber River. And of course, they did expand inland up the Thames very quickly. And whereas when it got to Ireland, it kind of covers Ireland's east coast as well as its north and south, and then it went inland there. But for whatever reason, the west coast of Ireland does not kind of enter the Neolithic until a later period, similar to how Scotland and Cornwall don't enter the Neolithic, or at least they don't have people practicing the Neolithic lifestyle in quite the same numbers. Now, that changes fairly quickly, but all that happens kind of towards the end of, not the end of, but it happens during next season's time period. Of course, there are still hunter-gatherers and fishers living in those regions, as well as the regions that the agriculturalists and the pastoralists are arriving in. There's, of course, some level of overlap. However, very quickly, agriculture is going to play a much bigger part, as well as herding, in the lifestyles of everyone living on the island. Now, there is evidence of continued connection with peoples living in what is now Normandy, Brittany, and the Low Countries. And that'll be a big part of what we cover in Ireland and Britain next season. We talked about the megalithic structures beginning to be built in Brittany, the Carnac stones. Britain kind of follows this same pattern. They begin to build these monumental tombs, the passageway tombs, the megalithic structures, of which Stonehenge, of course, is the most well-known. They'll also import long barrow tombs from those regions as well, which is ironic because one of the big theories about the long barrow tombs, and I haven't touched on this too much because, again, they're going to be a big topic next season, but long barrows are kind of thought to mirror the longhouses of the living. Long barrow tombs, you live in a longhouse while you're alive, and you're buried in a longhouse, or at least the spiritual equivalent of a longhouse once you die. And of course, in the British Isles, at least with a couple of exceptions, most villages in Britain and Ireland did not have longhouses. They have found one or two examples of them, but by and large, most of the housing found at Neolithic sites in Britain, as well as earlier hunter-gatherer sites, are typically small family dwellings as opposed to a larger multi-generational home. And just to be clear, when I say no longhouses in Britain or Ireland, I mean for this period and the upcoming period when they are building a lot of these megalithic structures like Stonehenge and others. At later periods, I'm sure there are more longhouses showing up. Now that just leaves us really to discuss pottery, which of course is one of the big hallmarks of Neolithic culture. Now, we've already discussed how the first agriculturalists in Britain are probably descended from people descended from the Cardium ware culture. However, of course, by the time they're arriving in Britain, the Cardium ware culture has disappeared, or at least their style of pottery has disappeared. What you see in Britain, at least the earliest pieces of pottery that they've discovered so far, is referred to as carinated bowl pottery. Now that term's a little difficult to describe just using words, so I'll just give the definition. But just keep in mind that this type of design is not just used in Britain, and in fact it will continue to be used by other peoples at other times. But essentially, carinet it's basically the shape is defined by, and this is a direct quote, by the joining of a rounded base to the sides of an inward sloping vessel. So I know that's not exceedingly descriptive, but that's really the best I can do, and I will include examples that they've found in Britain. So essentially, very rounded bases, and then they kind of have the fluted lips or something like that. And the ones in Britain are they're very sharply turned up. So they're kind of aggressively fluted, I guess might be the correct term. And I'll include some examples in the YouTube episode. But again, the British are not the only people making, bowls or pottery like this. That's just the specific term that they use to describe this kind of first wave of pottery found in what is now England. And I think they found most of these in what is now, I think, the region of Kent in England. The pieces of pottery found outside of this region and in Ireland, there's really not a name for it. Those are much rougher made. There's less, I guess, skill. They're very utilitarian. Whereas the carinated bowl types are, they're very well made. They're very delicate as well. They have very thin walls, only about 4 to 10 millimeters, depending on the size of the bowl or how much carnation there is in the vessel's shape. And some of them even have decoration, which is not something, again, you see in other parts of England or in Ireland. And the decoration is very simple. They appear to just have run their fingertips either up or down the vessel or along the sides. Occasionally, of course, they might use something like a blade to kind of incise like a line or things like that. But very rare that you see very much decoration, even in the delicately made carnated bowls. Also, most of them, in fact, again, they've only found one example of any of these pots or bowls with carrying holes or lugs. Most of them are just to be held in the hand or sat on the ground and used that way. But this is not a very long-lasting bowl type, at least from what I've been able to see, starting around 3,800. So really only 300 or 400 years that this type of pottery is being produced. After that, you begin to see a lot of regional variation and much different types and sizes of bowls be produced all over the British Isles and Ireland. And their coloration it's very bare bones, very basic. It's mostly brown or kind of a reddish brown. And a couple, I think, as well, that are black. They would also grind up stone to put in these bowls to kind of help it, survive the firing process without cracking too much. And again, that's not something you see outside of this kind of southeast of England, or what is now the southeast of England. And I think that will actually do us here for tonight. I was able to kind of get through that. Sometimes I go off on tangents, so I thought we might have a two-parter here for the British Isles. Worst case scenario, I was thinking no more than 3. But I think that kind of sums everything up pretty well. So Britain is now in the very early stages of the Neolithic, and that includes Ireland too. And next week we will be moving into the Americas for this season. I don't know how many episodes that's going to be, but it'll be quite a few, I'm sure. And then we'll, of course, move on to next season. And again, I am going to kind of rework how I'm describing this, because we are getting to a point where we do have at least semi-historical records, or at least more of them. And, of course, more and more things are going to show up in the archaeological record, because humans are making things that are meant to last a little bit longer. So, but I hope you all enjoyed this week's episode. Please be sure to send me any comments, constructive criticism, anything like that, questions. You can do that to my email, waradrevpod@gmail.com. You can send me a direct message on X/Twitter. You can also comment on the YouTube videos. I will answer there as best I can. I also stream over on YouTube during the week. I've got a big couple of weeks planned for that, as well as, please be sure to rate 5 stars, download, all that kind of good stuff on whatever platform you're listening or watching me on. It will help the channel grow. We're almost to 400 subs on YouTube, as well as, of course, the audio podcast is doing well on all of the platforms, or at least most of them. There's a couple of smaller platforms that I haven't checked in a while, but it's all corrugated in their RSS feed anyway, so sometimes it's hard to separate one service from another. But I appreciate you all for listening, and I hope you have a good rest of your day and week from whenever you're listening to this, and we'll see everyone next time. Peace.